Welcome back. Continuing our review of The History of Protestantism by James A. Wiley. So you can see what I'm doing here. We're in Book 3rd, Chapter 14. Book 3rd is John Huss and the Hussite Wars, and Chapter 14, which we are in, is the commencement of the Hussite Wars. So where we left off last time, in the commencement of the Hussite Wars, where the Hussites just got the better of the emperor. So we're continuing here on page 206 of volume 1. That the emperor could be worsted, supported as he was by the whole forces of the empire and the whole influence of the church, came totally unexpected. It became apparent that the Hussites were not the contemptible opponents Sigismund had believed them to be. He deemed it prudent to come to terms first with the Turk, so that he might be at liberty to deal with Ziska. Assembling an army, contemporary historians say of 100,000 men of various nationalities, he marched on Prague, then in possession of the Hussites, and laid siege to it. An idea may be formed of the strength of the besieging force from the rank and number of the commanders. Under the emperor, who held, of course, the supreme command, were 5 electors, 2 dukes, 2 landgraves, and more than 50 German princes. But this great host, so proudly offered, was destined to be disgracefully beaten. The citizens of Prague, under the brave Ziska, drove them with disgrace from before their walls. The imperialists avenged themselves for their defeat by the atrocities they inflicted in their retreat. Burning, rapine, slaughter marked their track, for they fancied they saw in every Bohemian a Hussite and an enemy. A second attempt did the emperor make on Prague the same year, 1420, only to subject himself and the arms of the empire to the disgrace of a second repulse. Outrages again marked the retreating steps of the invaders. These repeated successes invested the name of Ziska with a great renown, and raised the expectations and courage of his followers to the highest pitch. Seeing as they did the armies of the empire fleeing before them, Mount Tabor, where the standard of Ziska continued to float, was to become, so they thought, the head of the earth, more holy than Zion, more invulnerable than the capital. It was to be the center and throne of a universal empire, which was to bless the nations with righteous laws and civil and religious freedoms. The armies of Ziska were swelled from another indifferent cause. A report was spread throughout Bohemia that all the towns and villages of the country, 5 only excepted, were to be swallowed up by an earthquake, and this prediction, obtaining general credence, the cities were forsaken, and many of their inhabitants crowded into the camp. Deeming the chance of victory under so brave and fortunate a leader as Ziska very much preferable to waiting the certainty of obscure and inglorious entombment in the approaching fate of their native villages. At this stage of the affair, the Bohemians held a diet at Saslau, 1521, to deliberate on their course for the future. The first matter that occupied them was the disposal of their crown. They declared Sigismund unworthy to wear it, and resolved to offer it to the King of Poland, or to a prince of his dynasty. The second question was, on what basis should they accept a peace? The 4 following articles they declared indispensable in order to this, and they ever after adhered to them in all their negotiations, whether with the imperial or with the ecclesiastical authorities. These were as follows: 1. The free preaching of the gospel. 2. The celebration of the sacrament of the supper in both kinds. 3. The secularization of the ecclesiastical property, reserving only so much of it as might yield a comfortable subsistence to the clergy, for the execution of the laws against all crimes by whomsoever committed, whether laics or clerics. Further, the Diet established a regency for the government of the kingdom, composed of magnates, nobles, and burghers, with Ziska as its president. The Emperor Sigismund sent proposals to the Diet, offering to confirm their liberties and redress all their just wrongs, provided they would accept him as their king, and threatening them with war in case of refusal. The promises and the threats of the emperor the Diet held in equal contempt. They returned for an answer indignant rejection of his propositions, reminding Sigismund that he had broken his word in the matter of the safe conduct, and that he had inculpated himself by participating in the murder of Huss and Jerome, and that he had assumed the attitude of an enemy of Bohemia by publishing the bull of excommunication which the Pope had fulminated against their native land, and by stirring up the German nationalities to invade it. The war now resumed its course. It was marked by the usual concomitants of military strife, rapine and siege, fields wasted, cities burned, and the arts and industries suspended. The conflict was interesting as terrible, the odds being so overwhelming. A little nation was seen contending single-handed against the numerous armies and various nationalities of the empire. Such a conflict the Bohemians never could have sustained but for their faith in God, whose aid would not be wanting, they believed, to their righteous cause. Nor can anyone who surveys the wonderful course of the campaign fail to see that this aid was indeed vouchsafed. Victory invariably declared on the side of the Hussites. Ziska won battle after battle, and apart from the character of the cause, of which he was the champion, he may be said to have deserved the success that attended him, by the feats of valor which he performed in the field, and the consummate ability which he displayed as a general. He completely outmaneuvered the armies of the emperor. He overwhelmed them by surprises, and baffled them by new and masterly tactics. His name had now become a tower of strength to his friends, and a terror to his enemies. Every day his renown extended, and in the same proportion did the confidence of his soldiers in him and in themselves increase. They forgot the odds arrayed against them, and with every new day they went forth with redoubled courage to meet their enemies in the field, and to achieve new and more glorious victories. The cause for which they fought had a hallowing effect upon their conduct in the camp, and raised them above the fear of death. In their marches they were commonly preceded by their pastors, who bore aloft the cup, the symbol in which they conquered. Before joining battle, the sacrament was administered in both kinds to the soldiers, and having partaken, they went into action singing hymns. The spirit with which the Hussites contended, combining that of the confessors with soldiers, was wholly new in the armies of that age. In the rear of the army came the women, who tended the sick and wounded, and in cases of necessity worked upon the ramparts. Let us pause for a moment in our tragic narration. To this day the Hussites have never had justice done to them. Their cause was branded with every epithet of condemnation and abhorrence by their contemporaries. At this we do not wonder, but succeeding ages even have been slow to perceive the sublimity of their struggle, and reluctant to acknowledge the great benefits that flowed from it to Christendom. It is time to remove the odium under which it has long lain. The Hussites present the first instance in history of a nation voluntarily associating in a holy bond to maintain the right to worship God according to the dictates of conscience. True, they maintain that right with the sword, But for this they were not to blame. It was not left to them to choose the weapons with which to fight the sacred battle. The fulmination of the Pope and the invasion of their country by the armies of the Emperor left them no alternative but arms. But having reluctantly unsheathed the sword, the Hussites used it to such good purpose that their enemies long remembered the lesson that had been taught them. Their struggle paved the way for the quiet entrance of the Reformation upon the stage of the 16th century. Had not the Hussites fought and bled, the men of that era would have had a harder struggle before they could have launched their great movement. Charles V long stood with his hand upon his sword before he found courage to draw it, remembering the terrible recoil of the Hussite war on those who had commenced it. Chapter 15. Marvelous genius of Ziska as a general. Blindness of Ziska. Hussite mode of warfare. The Wagenburg. The iron flail. Successes. Ziska's death. Grit of his countrymen. Our space does not permit us to narrate in any detail the many battles, in all of which Ziska bore himself so gallantly. He was one of the most remarkable generals that ever led an army. Coxlius, who bore him no good will, says that all things considered, his blindness, the peasants he had to transform into soldiers, and the odds he had to meet, Ziska was the greatest general that ever lived. Accident deprived him in boyhood of one of his eyes. At the siege of Raby, he lost the other, and was now entirely blind. But his marvelous genius for arranging an army and directing its movements, for foreseeing every emergency and coping with every difficulty, instead of being impaired by this untoward accident, seemed to be strengthened and enlarged, for it was only now that his great abilities as a military leader fully revealed themselves. When an action was about to take place, he called a few officers around him and made them describe the nature of the ground and the position of the enemy. His arrangement was instantly made as if by intuition. He saw the course the battle must run, and the succession of maneuvers by which the victory was to be grasped. While the armies were fighting in the light of day, the great chief who moved them stood apart in a pavilion of darkness. But his inner eye surveyed the whole field and watched its every movement. That blind giant, like Samson, his eyes put out, but unlike Samson, his hands not bound, smote his enemies with swift, terrible, and unerring blows, and having overwhelmed them in ruin, himself retired from the field victorious. What contributed not a little to this remarkable success were the novel methods of defense which Ziska employed in the field. He conferred on his soldiers the advantages of men who contend behind walls and ramparts, while their enemy is all the time exposed. It is a mode of warfare in use among Eastern and nomadic tribes, from whom it is probable the Poles borrowed it, and Ziska in his turn may have learned it from then when he served in their wars. It consisted in the following contrivance. The wagons of the commissariat, linked one to another by strong iron chains, and ranged in a line, were placed in front of the host. This fortification was termed a Wagenburg. Ranged in the form of a circle, this wooden wall sometimes enclosed the whole army. Behind this first rampart rose a second, formed of the long wooden shields of the soldiers, stuck in the ground. These movable walls were formidable obstructions to the German cavalry, mounted on heavy horses and armed with pikes and battle axes. They had to force their way through this double fortification before they could close with the Bohemians. All the while that they were hewing at the wagons, the Bohemian archers were plying them with their arrows, and it was with the thinned ranks and exhausted strength that the Germans at length were able to join the battle with the foe. Even after forcing their way, with great effort and loss, through this double defense, they still found themselves at a disadvantage, for their armor scarce enabled them to contend on equal terms with the uncouth but formidable weapons of their adversaries. The Bohemians were armed with long iron flails, which they swung with prodigious force. They seldom failed to hit, and when they did so, the flail crashed through the brazen helmet, skull and all. Moreover, they carried long spears which had hooks attached, and with which, clutching the German horseman, they speedily brought him to the ground and dispatched him. The invaders found that they had penetrated the double rampart of their foes, only to be dragged from their horses and helplessly slaughtered. Besides numerous skirmishes and sieges, Ziska fought 16 pitched battles, from all of which he returned a conqueror. The career of this remarkable man terminated suddenly. He did not fall by the sword, nor did he breathe his last on the field of battle. He was attacked by the plague while occupied in the siege of Przemysław, and died on October 11th, 1424. The grief of his soldiers was great, and for a moment they despaired of their cause, thinking that with the death of their leader all was lost. Bohemia laid her great warrior in the tomb with a sorrow more universal and profound than that which she had ever buried any of her kings. Ziska had made the little country great. He had filled Europe with the renown of its arms. He had combated for the faith which was now that of a majority of the Bohemian nation, and by his hand God had humbled the haughtiness of that power which had sought to trample their convictions and consciences into the dust. He was buried in the cathedral of Sasloss, in fulfillment of his own wish. His countrymen erected a monument of marble over his ashes, with his effigy sculptured on it, and an inscription recording his great qualities and the exploits he had performed. Perhaps the most touching memorial of all was his strong iron mace, which hung suspended above his tomb. The Bohemian Jesuit Balbinus, who had seen numerous portraits of Ziska, speaks of him as a man of middle size, strong chest, broad shoulders, large round head, and aquiline nose. He dressed in the Polish fashion, wore a mustache, and shaved his head, leaving only a tuft of brown hair, as was the manner in Poland. Chapter 16. Second Crusade against Bohemia. Procopius elected leader. The war resumed. New invasion of Bohemia. Battle of Aussig. Total rout and fearful slaughter of the invaders. Ballad descriptive of the battle. The Hussites had lost their great leader. Still the tide of success continued to flow. When dying, Ziska named Procopius as his successor, and his choice, so amply justified by its results, attests that his knowledge of men was not inferior to his skill in the field. When the Bohemians laid Ziska in the grave, they looked round with no hope of finding one equally great to fill his place. In Procopius they found a greater, though his fame has been less. Nor is this surprising. A few great qualities intensely, and it may be disproportionately developed, strike the world even more than an assemblage of gifts harmoniously blended. Procopius was the son of a nobleman of small fortune. Beside an excellent education, which his maternal uncle, who had adopted him as his heir, took care that he should receive, he had traveled in many foreign countries, the Holy Land among others, and his taste had been refined, and his understanding enlarged by what he had seen and learned abroad. On his return, he entered the church in compliance with his uncle's solicitations, it is said, not from his own bent, and hence he was sometimes termed the tonsured. But when the war broke out, he entered with his whole heart into his country's quarrel, and, forsaking the church, placing himself under the standard of Ziska. His devotion to the cause was not less than Ziska's. If his spirit was less fiery, it was not because it was less brave, but because it was better regulated. Ziska was the soldier and general. Procopius was the statesman in addition. The enemies of the Hussites, knowing that Ziska was dead, but not knowing that his place was filled by a greater, deemed the moment opportune for striking another blow. Victory they confidently hoped would now change sides. They did not reflect that the blood of Huss and Jerome was weighing upon their swords. The terrible blind warrior, before whom they had so often fled, would never again encounter in battle. But that righteous power that made Ziska an instrument in chastising the perfidy which had torn in pieces the safe conduct of Huss, and then burned his body at the stake, they should assuredly meet on every battlefield in Bohemian soil, on which they should draw sword. But this they had yet to learn, and so they resolved to resume the war, which from this hour, as they fondly believed, would run in a prosperous groove. The new summons to arms came from Rome. The emperor, who was beginning to disrelish being continually beaten, was in no great haste to resume the campaign. To encourage and stimulate him, the Pope wrote to the princes of Germany and the King of Poland, exhorting them to unite their arms with those of Sigismund, and deal a blow which should make an end, once for all, of this troublesome affair. Than the Hussite heretics, the Turk himself, he said, was less the foe of Christianity, and it was a more urgent as well as a more meritorious work to endeavor to bring about the extirpation of the Bohemian adversary than the overthrow of the Moslem one. This letter was speedily followed by a bull, ordaining a new crusade against the Hussites, in addition to the letter which the Pope caused to be forwarded to the King of Poland, exhorting him to extirpate the Bohemian heresy. He sent 2 legates to see after the execution of his wishes. He also ordered the Archbishop of Lemberg to levy in his diocese 20,000 golden ducats to aid the king in prosecuting the war. The pontiff wrote to the same effect to the Duke of Lithuania. There is also a bull of the same Pope, Martin V, addressed to the archbishops of Mainz, of Treves, and Cologne, confirming the decree of the Council of Constance against the Hussites, and the several parties into which they were divided. At the first mutterings of the distant tempest, the various sections of the Hussites drew together. On the death of Ziska they had unhappily divided. There were the Taborites who acknowledged Procopius as leader. There were the orphans who had lost in Ziska a father, and would accept no one in his room. And there were the Calixtines, whom Coribut, a candidate for the Bohemian crown, commanded. But the sword, now so suddenly displayed above their heads, reminded them that they had a common country and a common faith to defend. They forgot their differences in presence of the danger that now menaced them, stood side by side, and waited for the coming foe. The pontiff's summons had been but too generally responded to. The army now advancing against this devoted land numbered not less than 70,000 picked men. Some historians say 100,000. They brought with them 3,000 wagons and 186 pieces of cannon. On Saturday, June 15th, 1426, they entered Bohemia in 3 columns, marching in the direction of Aussig, which the Hussites were besieging, and which lies on the great plain between Dresden and Toplitz, on the confines of the Slavonic and German worlds. On Sabbath morning, as they drew near the Hussite camp, Procopius sent a proposal to the invaders that quarter should be given on both sides. The Germans, who did not expect to need quarter for themselves, refused the promise of it to the Hussites, saying that they were under the curse of the Pope, and that to spare them would be to violate their duty to the Church. "Let it be so, then," replied Procopius, "and let no quarter be given on either side." On Sabbath forenoon, on the 16th of June, the battle began. The Bohemians were entrenched behind 500 wagons, fastened to one another by chains, and forming a somewhat formidable rampart. The Germans attacked with great impetuosity. They stormed the first line of defense, hewing in pieces with their battle axes the iron fastening the wagons, and breaking through them. Pressing onward, they threw down the second and weaker line, which consisted of the wooden shields stuck into the ground. They arrived in the area within. Weary with labor, it had cost them to break through it. The Bohemians the while were resting on their arms and discharging an occasional shot from their swivel guns on the foe as he struggled with the wagons. Now that they were face to face with the enemy, they raised their war cry and swung their terrible nails. They pulled their long hooks, and pulling the Germans from their horses, they enacted fearful slaughter upon them as they lay on the ground. Rank after rank of the invaders pressed forward, only to be blended in the terrible carnage which was going on this fatal spot. The battle raged until a late hour of the afternoon. The German knights contested the action with great valor and obstinacy, on a soil slippery with blood and cumbered with the corpses of their comrades. But their bravery was in vain. The Bohemian ranks were almost untouched. The Germans were every moment going down in the fearful tempest of arrows and shot that beat upon them, and in the yet more terrible buffeting of the iron flails, which crushed the hapless warrior on whom they fell. The day closed with the total rout of the invaders, who fled from the field in confusion and sought refuge in the mountains and woods around the scene of action. The fugitives, when overtaken, implored quarter, but themselves had settled it before going into battle, and accordingly no quarter was given. 24 counts and barons stuck their swords in the ground and knelt before their captors, praying that their lives might be spared, but in vain. In one place 300 slain knights are said to have been found lying together in a single heap. The loss of life of the Germans, according to Palicki, whose history of Bohemia is based on the original documents, and the accuracy of which has never been called into question, was 15,000. The wounded and missing may have swelled the total loss to 50,000. The number given in the Bohemian ballad, a part of which we are about to quote, the German nobility suffered tremendous loss, nearly all their leaders being left on the field. Of Hussites, there fell in battle 30 men. A rich booty was reaped by the victors, all the wagons, artillery, and tents, and a large supply of provisions and coin fell into their hands. The Pope, said the Hussites jeeringly, owes the Germans his curse for having enriched us heretics with such boundless store of treasure. But the main advantage of this victory was the splendid prestige it gave to the Hussites. From that day, their arms were looked upon as invincible. The national poets of Bohemia celebrated in song this great triumph. The following fragment is not unlike the ballads in which some of the early conflicts of our own country were commemorated. In its mingled dialogue and description, its piquant interrogatories and stinging retorts, it bears evidence of being contemporary, or nearly so, with the battle. It is only a portion of this spirited poem for which we can here find room. In mind let all Bohemians bear how God the Lord did for them care, and victory at Osseg give, the war they waged their faith to save. The year of grace, the time to fix, was 1426. The Sunday after Holy Vite, the German host dispersed in flight. Many there were looked on the while, looked on Bohemia's risk with guile. For gladsome they to see had been Bohemians suffer woe and teen. But thanks to God the Lord we raise, to God we glory give and praise, who aided us with mighty hand to drive the German from our land. The host doth nigh Bavaria war, crusading foes to chase afar, foes that the Pope of Rome had sent, that all the faithful might be shent. A tale of woe all hearts doth rend, thus to the hosts for aid they send. Bohemia's faith doth stand upright, if comrade aids in fight. The Count of Meissen said in sight, if the Bohemian bands unite, evil methinks will us betide, asunder let us keep them wide. Fear strikes me when the flails I see, and those black lads so bold and free. 'Tis said that each doth crush his foe, upon whose mail he sets a blow. Our Marshal, good Lord Vanck, spake, whoever God's war will undertake, whoever will wage it free from guile, himself with God must reconcile. On Friday then at morning light, the Chechen service held a rite, received God's body and his blood. Ere for their faith in fight they stood. Prince Sigismund did the same likewise, and prayed to God with tearful eyes, and urged the warriors firm to stand, and cheered the people of the land. By Predlitz on Behani's height, the armies met and closed in fight. Stout Germans there, Bohemians here, like hungry lions, know no fear. The Germans loud proclaimed that day, the Chechens must their creed unsay, submit themselves and sue for grace, or leave their lives upon the place. 'Gainst us ye cannot stand, they say, against our hosts ye are but dead. Look at our numbers, what are ye? A cask of poppy seed are we. The bold Bohemians made reply, our creed we hold until we die. Our fatherland we will defend, though in the flight we meet our end. And though a little band we see, a spoonful small of mustard we, yet none the less will sharply bite, if Christ but aid us in the fight. But be this pact betwixt us twain, whoe'er's by either army taken, bind him and keep him, slay him not. Expect from us the self-same lot. They say this thing we cannot do, the Pope's dread curse is laid on you, and we must slay in fury wild, both old and young, both maid and child. The Chechens too, same pact did make, no German prisoners to take. Then each man called his God upon, and thought his faith his honor on. The Germans jeered them as they stood, on came their horsemen like a flood. Our foes, they say, like geese today, with axe, with drink, with mace will slay. Soon lose shall many a maid and wife, sire, brother, husband in the strife. In sad bereavement shall remain, woes wait the orphans of the slain. When each on other 'gan to fall, the Chechens on their God did call. They saw before their van in view a stranger knight, whom no man knew. The Taborites began the fight, like men they forwards press and smite. Where'er the orphans took their road, their streams of blood like brooklets flowed, and many a knight displayed his might, and many a lord was good in fight. 'Twere vain to strive each name to say, Lord bless them and their seed for aye. For there with valor without end they did the truth of God defend. They gave their lives right valiantly, with thee, O Lord, in heaven to be. When long the fight had fiercely burned, the wind against the Germans turned. Their backs the bold Bohemians see, quick to the woods and hills they flee. And those that 'scaped the bloody scene, ate sadly told the Margravine. For faith and creed how fierce and wood the Chechen heretics had stood. Then 13 counts and lords of might did from their coursers all alight, their sword points deep in earth did place, and to the Chechens sued for grace. For prayers and cries they cared not aught, silver and gold they set at naught, e'en as themselves had made reply, so every man they did to die. Thus thousands 50, thousands twain, or more were on the Germans slain, besides the youths that did abide in helmets by the army's side. But these they kept alive to tell their lady how their people fell, that all might think the fight upon, that at Aussig for God was won. Ho I all ye faithful men, each lord and knight and citizen, follow and hold your father's creed, and show ye are their sons indeed. Be steadfast in God's truth always, and so from God you shall have praise. God on your offspring blessings pour, and grant you life forevermore. And that's the end of chapter 16. We move on to chapter 17, Brilliant Successes of the Hussites. Another crusade. Bishop of Winchester, its leader. The Crusaders. Panic. Booty reaped by the Hussites. Sigismund negotiates for the crown. Failure of negotiation. Hussites invade Germany and Austria. Papal bull. A new crusade. Panic and flight of the invaders. Scarce had this tempest passed over the Hussites when a more terrible one was seen rolling up against their devoted land. The very next year, 1427, a greater yet crusade than that which had come to so inglorious an issue was organized and set in motion. This invasion, like the former, was instigated by the Pope, who this time turned his eye to a new quarter for a captain to lead it. He might well despair of finding a German prince willing to head such an expedition, after the woeful experience of the nobles of that land had of Bohemian warfare. The English were at that time winning great renown in France, and why should they be unwilling, thought the Pope, to win equal fame, and at the same time to serve the Church by turning their arms against the heretics of Bohemia? Who could but tell the warlike Norman might now how to break the spell which had hitherto chained victory to the Hussite banners, although the Teuton had not found out the important secret. Pope Martin, following out his idea, selected Henry de Beaufort, Bishop of Winchester, the son of the celebrated John of Gaunt, and brother of Henry IV, as a suitable person on whom to bestow this mark of confidence. He first created him a cardinal. He next made him his legate à la terre, accompanying this distinguished dignity with a commission equally distinguished, and which, if difficult, would confer honor proportionately great, if successfully accomplished. In short, the Pope put him at the head of a new Bohemian crusade, which he had called into existence by his bull given at Rome, February 16, 1427. This bull the Pope sent to Henry of Winchester, and the bishop had forthwith to provide the important additions of money, soldiers, and success. The bishop now become legate à la terre, published in England, the bull sanctioning the crusade, not doubting that he should instantly see thousands of enthusiastic warriors pressing forward to fight under his banner. He was mortified, however, to find that few Englishmen were ambitious of taking part in an enterprise beyond doubt very holy, but which beyond doubt would be very bloody. Beaufort crossed the sea to Belgium, where better fortune awaited him. In the venerable and very ecclesiastical city of Mechlin, he published the Pope's bull and waited the effect. It was all that the warlike legate a la terre could wish. No such response had been given to any similar summons since the day that the voice of Peter the Hermit had thrilled the Western nations and precipitated them in fanatical masses upon the infidels of Palestine. The whole of that vast region which extends from the Rhine to the Elbe, and from the shores of the Baltic to the summits of the Alps, seemed to rise up at the voice of this new Peter. Around his standard there gathered a host of motley nationalities composed of the shepherds of the mountains, and the artisans and traders of the towns, of the peasants who tilled the fields, and the lords and princes that owned them. Contemporary writers say that the army that now assembled consisted of 90,000 infantry and an equal number of cavalry. This doubtless is so far a guess, for in those days neither armies nor nations were accurately told, but it is without a doubt that the numbers that swelled this, the Fourth Crusade, very much exceeded those of the former one. Here were swords enough, surely, to convert all the heretics in Bohemia. Led by 3 electors of the empire, by many princes and counts, and headed by the legate a la terre of the Pope, this great host marched forward to the scene, as it believed, of its predestined triumph. It would strike such a blow as would redeem all past defeats, and put it out of the power of heresy ever again to lift up its head on the soil of the Holy Roman Empire. The very greatness of the danger that now threatened the Hussites helped to ward it off. The patriotism of all ranks in Bohemia, from the magnate to the peasant, was roused. Many Roman Catholics, who until now had opposed their Protestant countrymen, feeling the love of country stronger in the bosom than the homage of creed, joined the standard of the great Procopius. The invaders entered Bohemia in June 1427, and sat down before the town of Mainz, which they meant to besiege. The Bohemians marched to meet the invaders. They were now within sight of them, and the 2 armies were separated only by the river that flows past the Mainz. The Crusaders were in greatly superior force, but instead of dashing across the stream and closing in battle with the Hussites whom they had come so far to meet, they stood gazing and silent at those warriors, whose features, hardened by constant exposure and begrimed with the smoke of dust and battle, seemed to realize the pictures of terror which report had made familiar to their imaginations long before they came in contact with the reality. It was only for a few moments that the invaders contemplated the Hussite ranks. A sudden panic fell upon them. They turned and fled in the utmost confusion. The legate was as one who awakens from a dream. His labors and hopes at the very moment when, as he thought, they were to be crowned with victory, suddenly vanished in a shameful rout. The Hussites, plunging into the river and climbing to the opposite bank, hung upon the rear of the fugitives, slaughtering them mercilessly. The carnage was increased by the fury of the peasantry, who rose and avenged the foe in his retreat, the ravages he had committed in his advance. The booty taken was so immense that there was scarcely an individual of whatever station in all Bohemia who was not suddenly made rich. The Pope comforted the humiliated Henry de Beaufort by sending him a letter of condolence, October 2nd, 1427, in which he hinted that a second attempt might have a better issue. But the legate, who found that if the doctrines of the Hussites were false, their swords were sharp, would meddle no further in their affairs. Not so the Emperor Sigismund, still coveting the Bohemian crown, but despairing of gaining possession of it by arms. He now resolved to try what diplomacy could effect. But the Bohemians, who felt that gulf between the emperor and themselves, first opened by the stake of Huss, had been vastly widened by the blood since shed in the wars into which he had forced them, declined being ruled by him. Such, at least, was the feeling of the great majority of the nation. But Procopius was unwilling to forego the hopes of peace, so greatly needed by a stricken and bleeding country. He had combated for the Bohemian liberties and the Hussite faith on the battlefield. He was ready to die for them, but he longed, if it were possible, on anything like honorable and safe terms, to close these frightful wars. In this hope he assembled the Bohemian Diet at Prague in 1429, and got its consent to go to Vienna and lay the terms of the Bohemian people before the emperor in person. And that is where we're going to pick up next time, because we are running out of time. Quite a tale, very exciting narrative here in James A. Wiley's History of Protestantism, a must-read. You must read this book. If not, you can get the playlist, and as I'm recording it right now, it will be added to the playlist at the First Amendment Radio Rumble page, so you can go there and find it. I haven't listed it on my website yet, but I will get it up there soon. I've been thinking about making some changes there. So anyway, it'll be there for you. And when I upload it, it's edited, so a lot of the faux pauses and clearing of the throat is edited out. So much better read, or much better listen to. And it will also eventually be on Audible, Lord willing, because I'm only halfway through Volume 1. And I've got 5 volumes to go, so we're going to be at this for a while. So I hope you'll join me every day live, or at least look forward to the posting when you get home from work or otherwise. But what an exciting recount of the history of Protestantism. I'm enjoying it more and more again as I'm reading it the second or third time. And I attempted to record it all once before, but this time I'm more practiced and at it, so I will get all the way through it, as I've done other volumes already, which you can also find at the same Rumble page, firstamendmentradio.net Rumble page, in the playlist tab there. That's all we have time for. So thank you all for showing up today. May the Almighty bless you all and keep you as you travel on the narrow way that leads to life. Yes, Repentance Road. I will see you all next time. Secrets of the Rapture. Is there a 500-year-old conspiracy? A propaganda machine so pervasive and entrenched, yet so elusive that the entire world could be taken in by it, working in plain sight, but unseen by the world for what it truly is? If prophecy is God-given history in advance, why does the prophecy that has conquered the age also exclude nearly 2,000 years of history? What is it that they are afraid that the light of history will reveal? To understand our place in time and prophecy, we must look in history for an interpretation, that which stands the test of time, that which agrees with the Word of God, and history has proven to be true. When cunning fables and fearful speculations are removed from our sight, then we may clearly see what is truly expressed in Bible prophecy, both that which has been fulfilled and that which has yet to come. God's express word is the sword that must be wielded to remove the scales from the eyes and dispel the darkness of deceitful conjecture. Secrets of the Rapture was written to expose that which the spirit of the age has conjured out of the darkness to blind the eyes of the church in the world today. Secrets of the Rapture, Deconstructing Pre-Tribulation Dispensational Futurism by yours truly, Nicholas Arthur, is now available at lulu.com and Amazon. Secrets of the Rapture. Be informed, edified, and grow in the faith as your spirit is daily nourished in a biblical worldview, because you love the truth. FirstAmendmentRadio.net/MOPI. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. Always listenable, at work or on the go. FirstAmendmentRadio.net/MOBI. No download or app necessary.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.